Hi there, and welcome back to yet another episode at Station Road. Now, we're very hot on the heels of the last video, which of course was looking at the Goodsyard weathering and this wire mesh fence. So the plan in today's video is just to look at that small piece of land that's just the other side of that wire fence, sandwiched between there and the road that runs down the hill. So once again, I had some fantastic feedback from the previous episode, and also a few more suggestions, and one being a common suggestion, and that was the weighbridge and how it butted up against the fence, therefore really only allowing access from one end of the weighbridge. So I took on board these suggestions, and also really tying in with the small wedge-shaped piece of land on the other side of the fence between that and the road, which I was going to create some landform and adding in a bit of undulating landform to tie in with the surrounding area. So my thoughts were, let's investigate the possibility of introducing another access way into the Goodsyard and just seeing how feasible it might be. So I think without further ado, let's just get into what I got up to. So as discussed, we're going to tackle this area, and as I'd mentioned in the previous video about adjusting the landform here. Now you're looking here and you're seeing some lines and you're wondering what's going on here. So once again, some great suggestions from the viewers from the previous episode and the comments they left. And why not have a set of gates here and another entry point into the Goodsyard? Now I'll say I'm not about to make a habit of changing every aspect of the layout based on what people suggest in the comments, because as so many of us actually say within the YouTube community, it's my layout and I'll do it how I want. But in this situation, I like the idea of doing this. So if on the odd occasion I do make a change to the layout which is based on suggestions, it generally means that the suggestion was a damn good one. So the only complication or issue that can arise from this, and if it does all go pear-shaped, then I'm going to blame you guys for suggesting it in the first place. We have a road that's on a slight angle going down a hill. We have a separate piece of baseboard here, and this is actually a lift-out section that runs along this join here. We have some hard MDF baseboard here. We have some high-density foam here, and essentially the road, access road here, has got to drop down and then also kind of twist a bit to meet the angle of this. So purely from a geometry point of view, there's a reasonable amount of complexity in this. But in saying that, I certainly think it's feasible. So what I'm going to do is take out the last three panels of this fence, which will then actually become the secondary entrance into the Goodsyard, and I'll probably just straighten this off, and the plan is to make up some laser cut gates, once again with the wire mesh, to position in here. So first things first, let's get into a little bit of dissection. So that was a little bit complicated, getting this section out, and unfortunately I didn't realise that this was only quite a shallow level of styrene, so I will probably build this up with a block of styrene to go in here, because from this point back that's permanent fixed layout. From this point it is a lift out section. So I was just using this piece of card to get an idea of the gradient for this access road, and what I'm going to do is stitch in a piece of, I think probably 3mm MDF, because that sort of bends quite nicely, and that MDF will come to this edge, so that'll come to that point there, and then I'm going to have to find a way to anchor it down, because it's going to drop down to a low level, and then it's going to meet our new block of polystyrene, which will be situated in here. So yeah, a little bit complex. I will say I'm not regretting it yet, so we'll persevere with this, and I'll come back a bit later on when hopefully we've got this styrene in here, we've got an MDF section in here, and they meet up reasonably well through here. So I've now sussed out a plan for working this out. So rather than actually filling this up from the second base layer down there with polystyrene, what I'm doing is actually I've made up a little wee 3mm MDF section here that's going to slot in there, and it actually sits on a beam there, and then I can anchor it to the underside of this. So I'll glue that in place in position there, so that creates a nice rigid base for there, and then of course we've got it lined up with the join between permanent baseboard and lift out section. And then I've made up a polystyrene filler here and cut it to the angles so that it's going to line up with the road and start to level out on a bit of a weird angle as it starts to approach here, and then with another 3mm piece of MDF, and what I've done is shaved off a little bit here and a little bit there on these pieces, and that's going to slot in here, and I'll anchor it at this end and then bend it down to meet up with the polystyrene filler. And I think the best plan is to put in some retaining wall wedges here, and that will anchor that in place and secure it. And it still means obviously that this is a lift out section that can be pulled out. So that's the plan for getting this road in. Right, so I've anchored in this first section, which is the 3mm MDF, and I'm just using PVA glue. It's nicely wedged underneath this polystyrene and in between a beam that runs underneath, and then I've just clamped this end and just waiting for it to set. So in the meantime, while this is drying, I quickly worked up some laser cut gates to go over here. So this is just laser cut from 0.9 or 0.8mm high density card, and what I've done is laser cut 2 sets and then sandwiched the mesh in between the 2 sets. And of course once this is completely dry, I'll then trim around the edges and give it a spray paint with similar colours. So I think it'll look the part. I mean, the only difference of course is we've got a square sort of frame for the gate, whereas these of course have got the round tubular type frame. But once they're in there, and of course we'll actually have the gates open, so they won't be closed and they'll sit in the open position. So once this is set and dried in here, and unfortunately it's quite cold today, so it's going to take quite a while for this to dry, I will then be able to insert our polystyrene filler in here, and then of course start setting in the MDF component on this side. Right, so this is mostly set now and it's reasonably solid, so we can now actually start putting these other components together. And once again, it's just a case of applying some PVA glue to add in these pieces. Wee strip of card here that I need to add into the edge of the Goodsyard just to raise up that 3mm MDF, because the cobblestone area is, of course, is slightly thicker. Right, so what I'm going to do here to anchor this down is temporarily pop some nails in here, which I'll then of course remove once the glue is set. So I'm just pre-drilling some holes so it's just a little bit easier to push these nails in. And I'm using the same nails that I actually used to anchor down my track work, which again is also used as a temporary measure. And then of course once the ballast is set and dried, then I pull the pins out. Right, so I'm going to let this section here actually dry out completely before I start forcing this down to the slope, because I don't want this springing back out. And of course I will keep the nails in there in the meantime when I do get to the point of bending this bit of road section. So as you can see, I have moved ahead a little bit further, and we now have the polystyrene land formations in place, and of course we also have the access road now anchored in and firmly in place as well. So I'm just whizzing over this with a base coat of paint, and then we'll get ready to install the cobblestone paving, which I'll lay down here. And we have some components that I have pre-cut out, and basically using the same method as with other areas, a paper template was made that I could then transfer the shape to the Metcalfe cobblestone. But I thought I'd just get this painted first before my anchor in the cobblestone, because that's just going to make it a bit easier. And this is not perfectly lined up, these components. Of course, they're going to be filled in with polyfiller and various other things to extend their shape a little bit. But of course the main thing is the separation between these two boards. So as I've mentioned, this is permanently fixed, this is a removable section, and that was the main goal, was to be able to create this access road but still have the lift out section. So I'll let this dry and then we'll take a look at applying the cobblestone to the access way. Right, so I'm going to begin gluing these cobblestone sections in, and I'm just using PVA glue for this. So as I mentioned, I pre-cut these cobblestones and I actually laid up a configuration that was then glued to just a thin piece of A4 paper so that I could get sections of this down in one piece. Right, so that's the cobblestones now stuck in place, and we'll just let that dry, and then of course I'll go over and weather this to blend it in obviously with this, and that should be our new secondary entryway into the goods yard complete. Right, so we've now added in the weathering to this access road and toned it in of course with the rest of the goods yard, and it's certainly looking the part. So I'd just like to offer my thanks actually to those who made the comment of adding in another access road to the goods yard. My initial thoughts when assembling the goods yard of course were the trucks would just simply reverse on to the weighbridge to be able to get weighed. And when I built the fence along the back, there was this nagging thought of that possibly not being entirely prototypical, although I did actually come across a photo somewhere, and for the life of me I can't find it now, where there was a weighbridge hard up against a brick wall. So I'm not entirely sure whether it might have just been added in afterwards in this particular photo or not. But in the majority of cases where I did a bit of research on weighbridges, of course it was a through weighbridge, so lorries could enter and exit at either end. I think really the main complication that maybe deterred me from considering the idea of this additional access road of course was the complication between the lift out section of the baseboard and the fixed section of baseboard, and maybe I just at the time put it in the too hard basket. So I'm really happy actually with how it's come out, and of course once I start adding some of the greenery and overgrowth and so forth in around the access road, either side of the access road, around the cattle dock and up to the edge of the road that goes down the hill, I think it will really sort of come to life in that area. So now once a lorry of course has been weighed on the weighbridge, it can exit via this access road and back out onto the main road. So there we have it, the new access road has been established for the goods yard, and I think it makes such a difference actually, because just purely from a logical point of view that vehicles, lorries, can actually drive in one entrance and exit out the other entrance. It also actually means theoretically a cattle truck or a livestock vehicle could come in that entrance and then just simply back up to the cattle dock. But of course I'm going to make that a overgrown and derelict cattle dock that possibly hasn't been used in many years. So like I said before, a huge thank you to those who suggested this, and I guess it brings back a little bit of the whole modelling aspect, and every now and then it really is actually worth taking a punt, taking a risk on something you know is actually going to be possibly quite taxing and complicated, but if you persevere with it you can achieve, you know, a desirable result that you were hoping all along. So in the next video I'll probably start getting into some of the overgrowth, the foliage, grasses and things like that in this particular area, because I'd really like to allow a little bit of overgrowth to possibly bleed in to the actual Goodsyard area itself. So I'll leave it there for this video. I certainly hope you've gained some inspiration and ideas once again for your layouts. Do take care everyone, look after yourselves. Of course don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will catch you next time. Bye for now.